In this video, I'm going to show you how to make tomato sauce out of frozen tomatoes. This saves me so much time, and most importantly, it allows me to focus on other things during the summer and wait for a cold, wintry day to do all of this cooking and canning. I have 4 bags of frozen tomatoes, and the first thing is to thaw them safely. If you just leave them on the counter overnight to thaw, you are almost guaranteed to have more bacteria than when you started, and when you're canning, that's just something that you want to avoid. So there are other ways you can do it, but I'm going to show you my favorite, which is to put warm water in a clean sink and just dump the frozen tomatoes in there. I like this method because I find it way easier to peel the tomatoes while they're still pretty solid, even though it makes your hands a little bit cold. I also see people thawing them on the counter or on the stove and then throwing away the liquid that the tomatoes release as they're thawing. But in my opinion, that's literally dumping flavor and nutrients down the drain. When you freeze and then thaw tomatoes, the cell walls are going to break, and what comes out is not just water, but it's also flavor, nutrients, salts, sugars, a lot of good things that I want to keep in my sauce. Side note, if you don't want to compost or throw away these peels, stay tuned until the end where I'll show you how to create a tomato powder, which can be used in a pinch as tomato paste. Once all the tomatoes are peeled, you have 2 options if you're looking for a really great sauce texture, and the first is running them through a food mill. Depending on how many tomatoes you're working with, this might be faster than the other option, which is running them through a high-speed blender. A high-speed blender is going to basically obliterate the seeds, and so you won't really be able to tell when it comes to the texture, but some people do think that the seeds make your sauce more bitter, so it's totally up to you. Either way, once you've got all the tomatoes peeled and pureed, it is time to cook the sauce down. I've seen some people skip this step because they've poured off all of that liquid from the thawing process, but keeping that liquid in and just committing to a long cook time not only intensifies the flavor of your tomato sauce, but it also increases the bioavailability of a nutrient called lycopene, which makes cooked tomatoes even more nutritious than uncooked tomatoes. If you've ever had your tomatoes separate in the jar, this also helps to prevent that because you're activating that pectin through heat. If you're wondering where the seasonings are, I always like to can plain tomatoes so that I've got more options available in the future, but you can use this same method with any safe tested tomato sauce recipe. As the sauce cooks down, get your canner ready by filling it up halfway with water along with your jars. You don't need to sterilize jars for this recipe, just heat the canner up with the jars in to barely simmering. I also wash and dry my lids and rings. In the past, you had to heat up the lids to make the sealing compound softer, but now you don't really need to do that. Once your sauce is the thickness that you like and your jars are hot, remove each jar one at a time and add 1 tablespoon of bottled lemon juice or 1 teaspoon of citric acid. This just makes absolutely certain that the pH of the jar contents are below 4.6 and there is 0 chance of botulism. You can also add salt if you want. I do a ½ teaspoon per pint, and then fill up the jar to 1/4 inch of headspace. Then wipe down the rim, place your lid, and tighten the ring with just your fingertips, not with your wrist, because we want air to be able to escape. Then return the jar back to the canner and repeat with the rest of the jars. Add the lid and bring up to a full boil, and then start your processing timer according to this chart. Once the time is up, just let it sit for 5 or 10 minutes, because if you lift the jars out right away, the temperature difference can suck the contents of the jar out. Let the jars cool naturally on the countertop overnight, and then test the seals to make sure everything is good to go. If a seal breaks, you can reprocess it right away, or just put that jar in the fridge and use it up first. Label and date the jars, and then store them out of direct sunlight in a cool place with the ring off or very loose to prevent false seals. While the tomatoes are processing, if you want to make that tomato powder, you can lay them out on a single layer of either silicone or parchment paper and use a dehydrator or an oven on the lowest temperature and dry them out until they break when you try to bend them. Then just use a blender or a spice grinder to create a powder out of them, and this can be used for a lot of things, but one of my favorites is if I need just like a tablespoon of tomato paste and I don't want to open a can, or I don't have a can on hand, you can just take a tablespoon of this powder and a tablespoon of water and make a paste. Just store it in an airtight container, and you can use this to flavor bread. You can add it to anything that you want to have just an extra tomato flavor. This sauce is a labor of love, but it is so worth it, and it's the perfect thing to do while I'm waiting for gardening season to really kick off. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit the like button so more people can see it, and I will see you in the next one.